Okay, next up, date and times of our next regular meetings. Actually, our next meetings are they're not on here, are they? Our special next meetings are budgetary meetings. Our next Monday and Tuesday, which are not on the agenda. They start at what time? 6 o'clock, both Monday and Tuesday in this room. And then after that, we have the regular facilities meeting on Tuesday, September 5th at 6:30. ELUC at September 7th at 6:30. Highway and Transport, both of those are in this room. Highway and Transportation is on Friday, September 8th at, not at 6:30. I think that's at 9 a.m. in the morning. And then the Committee of the Whole at 6:30 on September 12th. And then followed by the regular county board meeting at September 21st at 6:30. And then finally, about a month from now, is another special finance committee, which will be dealing with the agenda on September 28th at 6:30 in this room. Is that everything?
I think that's everything.
Okay. No. All right. Next up is public participation. We have quite a handful tonight. Just remind you that we have a total of an hour, 5 minutes per person. So if you could, make your speech and then let the next person go on, and the first person please turn on the microphone and leave it on for everybody else. Next, first person is L&D. 40.
I'm L&D. I'm here to one of two representatives of the Racial Justice Task Force. I want to thank you for having us here tonight. The Racial Justice Task Force was created by the county board because the community saw a need for the investigation of unequal treatment of minorities in the criminal justice system of Champaign County. In January 2016, the Racial Justice Task Force was formed, and we are nearing now the end of our work and will soon present our recommendations. We want to share an update on the RJTF and highlight a few budget items that you can expect to see and which we hope you will consider during the budget talks and as part of the public safety tax debate. Our subcommittees have all submitted drafts of their research and recommendations. We are reviewing and revising these sections, and we'll be pulling them together in the next 2 months. Many of our recommendations involve the need for funding. Although the task force did not receive a budget, the county, we request, and the citizens of the community request, that the county board be willing to financially invest in programs, services, and fundamental organizational shifts in order to eliminate the stark racial disparities which exist in the local system and which were the primary factor for creating the task force in the first place. We realize that a significant amount of funding will be available through the public safety tax soon, and this presents one opportunity for the county board to begin investing in the safety and well-being of its citizens through effective criminal justice programs that will begin to chip away at the racial disparities. Thank you.
Next up is Ryan Hughes. Mr. Hall, there's a couple of people in the hall. Would you let them know they can come inside? John? I think I saw a couple of people out there. They just looked like they were afraid of coming inside. If you check that out, please. Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Hughes.
Thank you. My name is Ryan Hughes. As Ellen said, I'm also a member of the Racial Justice Task Force. And what Ellen was pointing out is that we're at a critical moment as a task force. We're about 2 months out from bringing our report, all of our year-and-a-half work of research to you with recommendations. We also realize that you all are at a critical point in your cycle as you begin to look at the budget and start those talks. And we want to ensure that the recommendations that we put forth will receive full consideration by this board because, as Ellen said, it's time to actually invest in programs and services and other things that will begin to chip away at the racial disparities in our criminal justice system. I'm going to run through a few preview points of what you can expect, and these are just some of the recommendations that we're going to be talking about in our report. One of the recommendations from the Community Justice Task Force in 2013 was to create a Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, and this council would be would be in charge of working with all of the organizations within the county who are involved in the criminal justice system in any way. Our task force is going to reamp that recommendations for a coordinating council. But along with that, we'll need a criminal justice planner who will be responsible for facilitating that council. This staff person would also help to foster the collaboration between criminal justice officials, local governments, service providers, and other organizations. We also have recommendations regarding restorative justice and practices, and I'm not going to get into those significantly here because we have a really well-written, in-depth section in our report on restorative justice and practices. But it's going to be important for the county to consider how it's going to invest in restorative justice and how it's going to push restorative justice throughout all aspects of the criminal justice system. We're also going to be renewing the call for pretrial services in the county. This is a recommendation set forth by other groups such as the Community Justice Task Force and the Illinois State Supreme Court, for example. Staff and funding to implement pretrial services in Champaign County will therefore be very critical, and support from the county board will certainly be needed. The recommendations for pretrial services are really a critical part of our report and our recommendations because we've seen in the research and heard from many people that pretrial services are a key factor in being able to reduce racial disparities by reducing the impacts of financial release conditions on the economically disadvantaged. As we have also highlighted to you all before, a big part of our work has been looking at the variety of criminal justice data sources within the county. Going through that process has shown really poor consistency in data formats among the different criminal justice components, and also prohibitive accessibility to that data. And we believe that reducing racial disparities in the criminal justice system will require dynamic, thorough, and accessible data access. We worked with different groups at the U of I to begin that process to start to build the data portal, and we did. We built a model which we were then able to share with some officials in the criminal justice system, but without a budget we couldn't really take it beyond just a model. It's going to be important for the county to be the lead in coordinating a county-wide criminal justice data portal. This can be used for statistical analysis, community engagement, and quantitative program assessment. We can't reduce racial disparities without knowing more about them, where they are, and if our programs to reduce them are working. This effort to create a data portal is going to require significant funding for web programmers, a graphic designer, a data analyst, potentially other key staff people. We're also looking at juvenile justice, and one item to note around juvenile justice is the serious need for additional funding for the programs and services at the Youth Assessment Center, a facility supported by many different groups within the criminal justice system. Other examples of potential budget items that the Racial Justice Task Force is considering would include providing funding for police-related outreach, public education about the racial justice issues within our county, and the development of holistic defense services in the public defender's office. As I said, we're going to be coming out with these recommendations and others in about 2 months. There's going to be a lot more for you to read, to study, to see all the research that we put into this. But we're here tonight to tell you that we want to be considered. We don't want to have this report just be a report that sits on the shelf. So we really urge you to go through the recommendations, listen to what the community members who support these recommendations have to say, and really consider how innovative funding and budget support could be used to help reduce racial disparities in our criminal justice system. Thank you all for the time.
Next is Kelly Wiegand.
Hi, I'm Kelly Wiggin. That's how it's pronounced. Last time I talked to you, I was speaking extemporaneously after we had a little bit of extra time in the public comment section, and I was super nervous. Now I'm even nervouser because I actually have prepared some remarks, so I apologize in advance for all of that. Today I'm here to talk to you a little bit about my family's engagement with the community and some things that we've observed and ways in which our eyes have been open with regard to racial justice and also just the system here in general. My husband, he's a good egg. He volunteers with the local mentoring program. And a while back he mentioned to me that his mentee had missed several appointments in a row, which was really strange for that particular mentee because that kid was super courteous and would always text my husband if he was homesick from school. He would always call him to remind him of school holidays or other things. Well, we later figured out that the reason he'd missed those meetings was because he was in jail. And his family had gotten together some money, but they had decided to spend it on a lawyer instead of paying his cash bail. We learned this, and my husband immediately went to go see this kid, who is actually an adult. By now, once you're a senior or whatever, you're an adult. He went and saw him, he called me, he talked to me about it, and we decided to bail him out. Now, I've heard it said that there's no one in our jail who shouldn't be there. But if that's the case, then that elevates individuals such as my husband and I to a level where we get to decide who's in jail or isn't just by nature of who we're willing to post cash bail for. And that doesn't make any sense to me. I'm not an expert on pretty much anything. I just know that it doesn't make sense that I would get to make those decisions. I've also heard it said that you have to have cash bail because if you don't, you'll have some public safety issues, you'll have some flight risks, etc. And I know that isn't true because of the people who are arrested, 4% are the people for whom there are flight risks on average and public safety risks, and those people are not granted bond. They are held without bail. A current example is the guy being held in Decatur at the U.S. Marshals Service there. That's where they hold people. You know who I'm talking about probably. He's the person who is suspected of some pretty grievous crimes here. There are more than 80, I'm told, people held in our jail on a regular basis who could just leave if they could post cash bail. Now, I don't know all of the details of all of those things, but I know that statistically, those people are incredibly poor, and those people are disproportionately people of color. And so I want to urge you all to actually wait for the Racial Justice Task Force's recommendations before you make any steps financially. They've been working on this for a year and a half, and deciding to do something like building a new jail instead of waiting to hear what they've been working on is not a great idea. It basically would undermine much of the work that they've been doing. Just as a thought example, though, and some of the things that they're going to be talking about if you do wait 2 months, they'll probably tell you that if you were to imagine for a moment, instead of being right here in this room, if you could instead transport yourselves 100 miles that way toward Indiana, counties in Indiana have a totally different thing that's about to happen with them. As of January 1st, 2018, the Indiana Supreme Court has declared that all persons who are neither flight risks nor public safety risks have to be released without cash bail. Suddenly, all of those counties are looking at savings in the amounts in 6 figures, basically. Some of them, especially in the 9 counties for which this has already been implemented, they're seeing 7-figure savings. And that immediately reduces the population. No cash bail and bond reform is the direction the nation is going in, and you have a choice as to whether you're going to wait and stand on the right side of history and wait for their report to come out, or stand on the wrong side of history and decide to finance a new jail. Thank you.
Astrid Bergstrom. Astrid, welcome back.
My name's Astrid Bergson, and I came to talk about the pay for the county executive. This county executive program was sold to us as something that for nothing, that wouldn't cost us anything, and now it looks like it's costing quite a lot. I don't think the qualifications for the county executive justify $117,000. They are not greater than for the county board chair, in fact, where we pay $30,000, but I think $70,000 will get you someone with all the qualifications you need. And some people say, well, but then he could be the county administrator too. Well, he couldn't. That's a very big job, and this county could not function with a partisan county administrator. We have an excellent nonpartisan one. But the county executive job isn't, if you put it up to your qualifications for salary committee, I think you'd be lucky to get 70 for it. So I don't, that 60,000 extra that you want to pay them will come out of a social program. And we've taken enough out of the social programs. Okay, thank you.
Paul Muth?
Good evening. Well, I'm starting off by looking at an old News Gazette. I canceled my subscription when they fired 38 union printers, so maybe I'm out of the loop. I rely on my friends to link me to articles. So, what I was going to ask about is, and Kalmanoff was already sort of mentioned to by the Racial Task Force group, and his. I was just looking through the rundown from an older article about what he suggested and what's been done. It looked to me like closing the downtown jail was one of the only major things. There's been some remodeling and some welcoming space at the jail sort of thing implemented, but the downtown jail was scandalous because it got to that point where it had to be closed for lack of maintenance. It's suppressed perhaps only by the saddling of the nursing home with the $1 million debt, and some of you people probably don't know about this even, but when it was decided to go to wood instead of steel and they had the black mold problem, it was $4 million, and I don't know how much it was clawed back, but they're still paying that back, and that's outrageous, and that's a tangent, but I did want to get it in there. But I'm looking at a pretrial diversion is one of the main things, and people say, that's the judge's decision, but moral suasion or whatever it takes to get them to come around. I know there's a vested interest of the lawyers too, of course, probably can't ignore that, but something has to change to stop people who aren't violent to society themselves and aren't flight risks to not be incarcerated and fill the census and perhaps change their lives in ways. One of the things I did know about, just because I did speak with someone who's in the position to know, is that there has been sort of mental health and other sorts of diversion programs that are being implemented. Maybe the News Gazette just doesn't find that too reportable, and as I say, I'm out of the loop on that. But I'd like to know how effective that has been, and I don't know if the task force is looking into that. That's not really their purvey, under their purvey, but whatever. But I've been dwelling on this for quite a while, and one of the ones that stuck out to me was a sobering center. I don't remember that when Kalmanoff was here. I was attending his talks and his presentations. But I'm not saying you excuse the person of the DUI and take their license away, but it seems to me if there was any other way to staff without having the jail processing to go on, you take their keys, they take their license, and they're going to come back. And I guess there's no budget for that. This was actually offered some years ago when there was a little bit more money, and it hasn't been implemented. And that in itself could probably divert and actually help quite a few people in ways that are hard to calculate, because a night in jail is an experience that maybe that is sobering, but maybe there's something to do before it gets to that stage, or multiple offenders, et cetera. But as was pointed to by and I'll close with this, the absolutely outrageous, Champaign County has the worst ratio of incarceration of minorities, perhaps in the country. It's surely true of Illinois. And it isn't because people are more violent and more criminal. We know that drug use is very on par between whites and minorities. So I don't know how you're going to get the judges to come around. I'm coming back to that because, again, one of the major diversion things that hasn't been implemented is pretrial and sorting people out in that way. And I know there's a lot of vested interests that aren't looking towards that. But the people that are really vested have their vested interests are the taxpayers and the citizens and the people in this community who want to see a more humane and even a more economic approach to problems of the justice system and a civil society. So thank you for your attention.
Ricardo Diaz.
Greetings, I'm a resident of Urbana, and my day job takes me across the state, and I see a lot of other counties and their systems, and I often find myself saying, I'm from Champaign County. We've taken care of that problem. We've done this, we've done that. And I don't want to brag because I'm there and I'm saying something that they don't have or they haven't quite addressed, but I'm proud to say we're doing it here. So it feels good to be part of Urbana and part of Champaign County. But normally I'm in the advocacy of immigrants and our contributions to the area, and so as I become involved in that, I know not only how much we work and make the situation better, but also, in a sense, how well we are, how well off we are, and that we're a little bubble in the rest of the state and the country, and that we're a very welcoming area for immigrants. And starting Monday, when the Trust Act is signed by the governor, the rest of the state will be taking on pretty much our similar way of operating with immigrants when it comes to law enforcement. And so we're like 5 or 6 years ahead of the rest of the state. So once again, great for Champaign County. But I want to address two populations that I've been surprised at precisely because of my day job and working with immigrants. Sometimes we take groups of both students and other people through the county jail so that they learn how things work. If you're ever arrested, this is what would happen to you, this is what the procedures are, and this is how you would do things. And often it's people from other countries, people from other areas, and people that hopefully will never have to be processed. And one of the things that we find again and again, besides the hard things that one learns why people are there, is, and these are mental patients. Oh, that one we separate because of this and other reasons. And I've thought about that over the years, and I thought, of all the populations that we have, and the ways we do, we have problems with our nursing home and, whatever. If you're old, maybe you don't want to be in this county unless you had the means. If you're mentally ill, I know that, because I call, whenever I see a new counseling office call there, I call them up and find out whether they have services in other languages. So I'm acquainted with the mental side, the mental services, and it's hard. If you don't have money, you're in really tough shape when it comes to help. But what I personally, and not talking for my organizations that I work with, it would be really atrocious to end up in the county jail because I had a mental disability or I needed help. Last Sunday, just as it happened, my family brought in a person. We needed help on the street, and we ate breakfast together. As it happened, we were eating breakfast, real breakfast that morning, and talking to him, and I said, it won't be long before he might end up there. So I guess as a regular resident, I see, and I've We always ask for public participation. I'm very proud, again, to be in Champaign County, where all of a sudden I can't find the seat when I come. So at least there's a dialogue going on here tonight, and that's excellent. So let me finish with this. I guess it comes from the immigration side. When I have to deal with law enforcement and call Chief Cobb or call, previously Pat or the sheriff, we can usually establish a dialogue when somebody's been arrested. But where I can't help and I can't do anything about is when people end up in the jail because of their mental illness. And they end up doing something that doesn't fit our society, but in this country, we don't have a place for them. Mental health facilities, if you can't afford it, you stay in there for a little brief and then you get put on the street. I feel that it doesn't rhyme with who, and it is not. I know you guys have to make a lot of decisions, but once you've been assigned a budget from, at the sheriff's office or whatever else, they'll have to make do with that budget. So I realize from my perspective as a regular resident that this is not just an executive kind of thing. You don't decide that you're going to build a mental facility. Ultimately, it rests with the decision makers, which are on the legislative side. So I don't know the details of all you have to deal with, but building more space so we can put people in jail so that the law enforcement can take care of people with mental problems does not seem like a solution to me. If I were ever in that situation, it would be like, that's not how I would want to treat it, and that's not how I want a family member, a friend, to end up in. So, it's your job to figure it out, but I just have to say that as a regular person, I don't see that as something that would be acceptable to any one of us as a solution. Thank you.
Mr. Aaron Bryant. Aaron Bryant.
Good evening. I'd like to take a few minutes of your time to talk to you again about the compensation factor for our new county executive position. When I read on Facebook after your last committee of the whole meeting that you'd set the salary or voted to set the salary at $117,000, honestly, I thought Josh Harkey was lying to me. I thought it was a joke. Turns out, no, that is absolutely what you voted for. A recurring theme I hear a lot. I come to a number of these meetings, not all of them, mind you, but I come to quite a few. And a recurring theme I keep hearing from this board, and both in our meetings and individually, is that the county doesn't have enough money. The county doesn't have enough money to keep supporting our nursing home. The county doesn't have enough money to, bring on expensive initiatives like pretrial services. It doesn't have enough money to expand mental health services for the lowest income members of our communities. It doesn't have enough money to do the things that your constituents are asking you to do. And so I guess I'm a little surprised that you're all going to sit there and expect me to believe that the best way to spend the taxpayers' dollars is to give such an exorbitant salary to the county executive, a position in which the job description of and responsibilities for are very poorly defined. Yes, it could get rid of the county administrator, but by the statute, it doesn't have to. It doesn't get rid of Pius and the $30-some-odd thousand that he makes to be our county board chair. And I guess I also hear a lot the idea that, our taxes are already too high. We can't raise taxes to pay for things. And then, there's this idea that somehow, like, the compensation factor has to be high if you're going to recruit a qualified individual. And I take a little bit of an exception to that personally, because I don't think that public service is about the dollar figure. Now, I don't talk about this a lot, and this is not something that everybody knows about me, but in 2004, I enlisted in the United States Marine Corps. 2 years later, I was deployed to Iraq. where, you know, if you guys paid attention about anything in Iraq, it wasn't a very pleasant place to be. And, you know, I have a nice little scar on my back from a piece of shrapnel that I took from an IED. I have a friend in that same explosion who lost his leg. Those don't grow back. For my service to my country, for my base salary as my rank, for the hazardous duty pay that you receive when you deploy to somewhere dangerous like that. And mind you, the 7 months I spent in Iraq, that money is tax-free. I made the whopping sum, and I had to go look this up. I literally went and looked at my tax return to be able to give you an exact figure for this. $25,173. $25,173 to put my life on the line. And you're telling me that it's going to take $117,000 to get a qualified candidate to come in here and do we don't even know what? I find that disgusting. And quite frankly, if anybody on this board, the next time I hear somebody say, well, we don't have the money to do that, I'm going to point at this moment right here and go, well, you sure as hell had enough money to give somebody to oversee what? And I'm not saying you guys should take the compensation factor for the Marine Corps and use that as a basis for how you pay people, because quite frankly, yeah, they pay like crap. You probably don't want to go down that route. But I will say that if you do not make an amendatory vote to lower that compensation to something more reasonable, that come the time for your next election, I think that your constituents are going to be very interested in hearing where your priorities lie. Not with spending money on them, but on back scratching and playing political games about, you know, sitting in the good old boys club and making sure that, you know, your buddy's got a good position set up for him. And so, you know, I'm out of time, but I would just like to say that I am very disappointed in this board for letting that happen in the first place. And I would ask you to look into your conscience and reconsider and think maybe about setting this at a more reasonable level and taking the rest of that money that you're not going to pay for that and looking into what the RJTF has to say and putting that money towards services that benefit everybody in this community and not just one person. Thank you for your time.
Next is Biana Stamps. Biana Stamps.
Hi, I'm Yana Stamps. I'm a member of BP&J, has built programs, not jails, and I just want to go off of my experience. Thanks. From joining the program and learning about the RJTF in the first place. At my first meeting with the BP&J, I learned about the RJTF, and I thought it was a great initiative to lowering what I heard was the most most disproportionate racial bias in the jail here in Champaign County. And so that Thursday, actually, because we had the meeting on Tuesday, and so I went to the RJTF meeting that Thursday. And in that meeting, I swear it was the most intense meeting I have ever been in. And I just want to say that based off of the meetings that I have been in for the RJTF and what I have learned, I've read all the sections that they've prepared. I haven't read the newer versions of it, but I've read the drafts. And I just want to say that the year and a half that they put into these meetings and into this work and this emotional labor, this actual labor that they're putting forth for their communities, I think that it would be a total undermining of their labor and of their preparations and their recommendations to consider the sheriff's proposal for the new jail. I think that would be a total abuse of their emotional labor they've put in. I've been in intense meetings for the IDTF, and I'm sorry. I feel that not only will the new jail undermine their labor, but will also exacerbate the problems that they have been trying to work to alleviate. And that's all. Thank you.
Mr. James Kilgore. Mr. James Kilgore.
Good evening. I'm also speaking on behalf of Bill Programs Not Jails about the nexus between the Racial Justice Task Force and the jail building proposals. I think over the course of the last few weeks we've seen the issue of racial justice come on the national political agenda in quite a striking and shocking way. And I'm sure all of us have been horrified to see neo-Nazis, white supremacists, Ku Klux Klan members in the streets acting in aggressive and violent ways. And that's a product of an historical legacy of racism. An historical legacy of racism that exists in many parts of the country. And Champaign County, as you all know, has its own historical legacy of racism, as we see in the jail population, which is disproportionately black, 65 to 70% in a county that's 13% black. But fortunately, Champaign County has at least taken some steps to get ahead of the curve. And Champaign County has formed a racial justice task force to address the issues of the historical legacy of racism, to try to make sure that we don't end up with the kinds of conflicts that we've seen in Charlottesville and other parts of the country. But the county board now faces a dilemma, because you have to make some choices. And the sheriff wants new jail cells, and looking at the financial picture, we're basically seeing that we know that there's $1.1 million in retired bond funds that's now available through the public safety sales tax. And according to the calculations, it's going to cost $5 million for a new office for the sheriff, and I'm guessing that the jail proposal that's there is like somewhere between 10 and 12 million, although we don't have figures. I think it'll probably be higher than that. But nonetheless, the point is that in order for the county to finance that, they have to take out a bond over the course of 20 years typically, and according to the county administrator, that could get a bond of somewhere around $12 million. So what that means, number one, is that it's probably not even enough to cover the jail building. But number two, what it means is that any recommendations that come from the Racial Justice Task Force to deal with the issues of the historical legacy of racism will not be funded. There will be no money, no resources for them. So it's absurd to think that we can deal with the historical legacy of racism without putting resources into funding staff, funding programs, and so forth to address those problems. And what may not be known to everyone is that even in Charlottesville, before the actions took place around the statue, that Charlottesville had voted to fund $8 million for an equity fund as a way of dealing with some of their historical legacies of inequality. So there was a recognition there, although it was too late in many ways, that there needed to be some resources allocated in order to deal with the issue of racial justice. So I think the board has to make a difficult choice. If you opt for funding the jail, with the proposal that's on the table, you're opting to say, we're not going to address racial justice. We're going to put that on the back burner. We're going to kick it down the road and hope it doesn't flare up. And we're going to opt for giving black people in this county who are disproportionately incarcerated, we're going to opt for giving them shiny jail cells and more comfortable beds and mental health treatment inside a jail, rather than giving them programs and opportunities in the community that will keep them out of the jail and will lead to a more peaceful and healthy community. So I hope you will think very carefully and acknowledge and respect the efforts of the Racial Justice Task Force that you have appointed, the importance of their work, and recognize that now is a time to leave behind this model of incarceration, to leave behind this model of solving social problems by locking people up and looking for humane solutions that build peaceful and healthy communities. Thank you.
Albert Stabler. Albert Stabler. Albert Stabler.
Hi there. My name is Bert Stabler. I live in Urbana. I also work with Build Programs, Not Jails. And I want to talk a little bit about the concept. I'm going to drop a term here and hopefully help it make sense. Carceral humanism. So carceral meaning jail, and humanism meaning, appreciating people as unique and special people that deserve, care. And there's, to, kind of go big picture for a second, there's a long history in the U.S. In our penal culture of reforming our way to a larger and larger prison apparatus. And this is an inside iota to Miriam Kaba, who's an amazing African-American activist of color woman was based in Chicago. I think she's in New York now. And you can see it beginning in Philadelphia with early prisons where they believed that isolation would fix everything, and everyone was killing themselves, and they're like, oh, well, labor will fix it all. Oh, no, forced labor isn't working. Oh, we should try having indeterminate sentence lengths, and people are living their entire lives in prison. We should try having determined sentences. Oh, well, now we have, legislated, sentencing guidelines like 3 strikes and so forth. We see this in mental health too. There was a push to create mental health institutions for folks who needed it. In the early days in Illinois, there were several, and of course they were deinstitutionalized in the end of the last century, or in the middle of the last century. And these waves have just always, the only result has been that jails have gotten bigger, and that's a trend that we can see in this county. And I want to just bring up what has happened since 2015 or so with regard to how the sheriff in Champaign County has approached the issue of mental health and substance abuse treatment. I believe he was responsible for convening, somewhere 2015, a group to begin talking about jail diversion. And also at that time, he was beginning to write a grant to the Department of Justice. I attended, and a lot of other folks attended, September 30th, 2015, a behavioral health jail diversion initiative discussion in this room. And he had submitted the grant. The grant came through $150,000 for 2 years. And the purpose of that grant, which is still in the PDF online, this grant will support collaborative county approaches to reducing the prevalence of individuals with mental disorders in the jail. In November of last year, the county administrator and the sheriff put forward a package to put mental health services and other amenities into the jail, while suggesting that there might be, at some point in the future, a behavioral health center that might be provided for under that funding stream. And that was solidly knocked down by the voters by a 70 to 30 margin. For various reasons, people don't want to pretend that a jail is a mental health center. However, this grant has resulted in this crisis response planning committee meeting. It's continued to meet. The last minutes I could find were from, I should also credit my colleague Chibundo. We looked at them from the minutes from April, and you can find those online. But the next steps that they're working on is coming up with their final report. And essentially, they kind of talk about how this, I'm quoting, "This process begins with the belief held by many that there is a need for an assessment center." This is still an open question. They go on to talk about how a lot of what we are doing takes place in the jail, and that this issue is greatly politicized in this community, referring to groups like ours, I presume. And that in many communities, the sheriff's office is a primary barrier, but not in this community. The idea being that we don't need to worry, we can stop worrying and just hand over mental health to the penal system. But of course, doing that results in criminalization of mental illness. The money could be spent on homelessness, drug treatment, mental health treatment, reentry services for folks who've been incarcerated, and that's what we'd like to see. Thank you.
Jane Capizzelli. Did I pronounce that right?
Oh, yeah, that is. Hi, I'm a resident of Urbana, and I'm here today because of the upcoming vote to eliminate the county administrator position, and you want to replace it with the county executive. I'm against the county executive because it's a political salary of more than $117,000 and more because of costs of administrative support, which would waste vital county funds. And the public comments have highlighted many areas that would be way more worth it and serve the needs of the people of Champaign County more directly. The Racial Justice Task Force, several people have talked about that. Pretrial services, several people have talked about that. Juvenile justice, mental health services. How many public defenders does it have $117,000 buy? How many public defenders could you pay with that? That's all.
Hi, I'm Dave Laker. I'm sure all of you know me by now. I don't know what I'm going to say. I really didn't. I didn't intend to speak tonight. I didn't speak at the last meeting because there's so much confusion and all kinds of rhetoric and opinions. And in the end of all that, the question that I have has not been answered, and I'm going to ask it again. What about Sue? Who's going to take care of Sue? That's still my question. I don't hear any, I hear lots of, there's some blame going around. I've never attacked anybody on blame. There's plenty of blame if you want to do that. You brought it up at the last meeting, I think. But, there's no point in that. I would really like to make this thing work some way. Whether we sell it, whatever it is we do, but we've got to get together somehow and get going the same direction. I don't know what direction that is yet. I don't know what's right or wrong. I know that I'm biased, and my feelings are with Sue. First and foremost. Make no mistake about it. This board, I don't know how many years ago, took it upon themselves to build and to underfinance that nursing home. And it's here now and has been underfinanced and undermanaged and wrongly managed for what, 15 years, Patsy? Yeah. That's not Sue's fault, and that's not the fault of people that are in a nursing home. You pointed out last week, responsibility is within the confines of this room. You people have got to do your job. And you got to get past this partisan stuff. I mean, pretty soon somebody's going to say, well, you know, Champaign County, that's kind of like Springfield and the stuff that's going on down there. And how many people here are happy with what's going on in Springfield? Could I get a show of hands? Nobody wants to talk about that? Well, I don't either, but, you know, I think we're better than that. I really do. And I think you people need to reach in and get past some of the crap that gets thrown around inside this room and make this thing work. You took on the responsibility of this nursing home all those years ago, and now you just can't wipe your feet on it or walk away from it. And that's what you're wanting to do. The type of vote that we had in April indicated that. It wasn't a clear-cut thing either way. And I don't know. That's all I got to say tonight. Just one more thing. Remember Sue.
Is there any other public participation? Seeing none, we'll close that. Let's move on to the consent agenda. Are there any items that the county board members want to pull off the agenda? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve?
Moved.
Approved by Mr. Esri. Second? Second by Mr. Hartke. Roll call, please.
Patterson? Yes. Petrie?
Yes.
Rector? Yes. Rosales?
Yes.
Summers? Yes. Tinsley?
Yes.
Alex? Yes. Anderson? Yes. Clemens?
Yes.
Coert? Yes. Cruz? Yes. Esri?
Yes.
Furtado? Yes. Goss?
Yes.
Harper?
Yes.
Hartke?
Yes.
King? Yes. Marsh?
Yes.
McGuire?
Yes.
Mitchell? Yes. Weibel?
Motion carries. Next up, communications from board members. Are there any? Mr. McGuire?
Yes, thank you. I don't want to take too much time, but I do want to promote the expungement and record sealing summit from the Champaign County Clerk's Office. It's a second annual one. It's a full-service assistance with application preparation, filing for adult, juvenile, criminal expungement, sealing, and alternative forms of relief. I want to try to give a little more information because it's a little different this year in signing up. The actual expungement summit is October 21st at Stone Creek Church from 8:30 to 5. Registration is actually already open. And the idea here is to get signed up early, get fingerprints, get the application in. You can go through the process then, and so when the summit actually happens, you're more prepared, and we can work through that process and it'll work out much better. You can go to the Circuit Clerk's Office website and get those things accomplished, get signed up. Also, really thank all the volunteers, but if there's people that want to volunteer, if there's attorneys that can volunteer, this thing was really huge. It had a great impact last time on people's lives and the people that served. But if attorneys can go to the website and also sign up, if you get your fingerprints and go through that process, they can then be prepared when you show up. The CUMTD is providing free rides. Champaign County Sheriff's Office, the Champaign Police Office, the sheriff, the Urbana Police Department, and Champaign Police Department are providing the fingerprinting for free. Of course, the actual fee for the expungement is going to be waived again. So please get all that information out there. It's great that you're here to be able to pass that information along. If you need any more information, please look at the county clerk's web or the county circuit clerk's website. And thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Aguirre. Ms. Coward.
Yeah, I want to ask Mr. McGuire, if people have been there before at the last summit, and can they come back again?
Yes, I would suggest that they do, especially if some of the things weren't accomplished before. And I would suggest that you try to send any questions, and there's a phone number on here, 384-3725, the circuit clerk's office, and ask those questions directly so you'll know, what questions that you can ask and what will help with that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, just a quick reminder, this weekend is the Sangamon River Music Festival in Mahomet. It's all free music for Friday and Saturday night. There's usually a huge crowd. I'm kind of coordinating the beer festivities for the Lions Club, and all that money goes right back into our community. First for those who Helen Keller said were our most disadvantaged, those with hearing needs and those with eyesight, but it also goes, all the rest of that money goes into the kids in the Mahomet area.
Any other announcements? Okay, thank you. I seek approval of the minutes of July 20th, the regular meeting, and also the July 25th, 2017 study session. Is there a motion to approve? Mr. Mitchell, second by Mr. Rector. Discussion on the minutes? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. All opposed, motion carries. Moving on to standing committees, there's no action for county facilities. ELUC, Mr. Esri.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move resolution number 10043, authorizing the renaming of certain parts of existing North Lincoln Avenue.
Second by Ms. Cowart. Mr. Esri, you want to speak on that? Go ahead.
Just for a minute or two here. We had a good discussion. It was pretty lengthy at ELUC. To sum it up, we were scheduled to basically put it off till the next meeting in September. We kind of reversed course pretty abruptly after Mr. Charlo, one of the parties affected by this, came forward and said he doesn't think more time will help the actual residents affected by this. So we went ahead and approved it at the ELUC. It's not pleasing to everybody. I don't know that we can please everybody. I think most everybody wanted to try and keep Lincoln in the name somehow, like an old Lincoln Drive or something like that. But we kind of went with MetCAD when MetCAD said, nope, that basically you could say no more Lincoln. Now, granted, we could override them, but yet MetCAD being the ones who are doing the dispersing of emergency services, okay, we better listen to their expertise. Again, this isn't perfect, but we think it's probably about as good as we're going to get. So I guess just hope that everyone would vote for it. Thank you.
Further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. I move adoption of resolution number 10044, approving the fiscal year 2018 county planning contract work plan.
Second by Ms. Furtado. Discussion. Ms. Petrie. Ms. Petrie.
Thank you. I just want to note why my vote this evening will be a no. It's been consistent over all the years that I've been on the board. It has nothing to do with the work that needs to be done. It has nothing to do with the people doing the work. It has to do with urban planning best practices, and that this is split. It isn't within the county office. It's over at RPC, and that just is not the best way to do planning for the county.
Mr. Esri?
Again, just speak to this a little bit. If you notice, it is an increase of $12,000 some over previous years' contracts. Mr. Snyder at the ELEC committee informed us that there's been another contract that was canceled, with RPC. So in essence, that 12,000 is less than the contract that was canceled. So it is an increase with RPC, but overall, our spending for RPC will be less. What we're paying RPC for services in total. And Mr. Snyder, I believe, has something to add to that.
Go ahead, Mr. Snyder.
Thank you. Just to give you a little more detail, the program savings that from the one that we're proposing elimination of is $22,807. So if you offset that by the increase in the planning contract, the net savings to general fund is $10,527.
Further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? All opposed?
No.
Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Esri. I believe Highway and Transportation, everything here was on the consent agenda, so let's move on to Finance. Mr. Alex.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move adoption of resolution number one, the Finance, this is County Board. I missed the COW meeting, so I'm, off schedule. I move adoption of resolution number 10049, authorizing payment of claims.
Second by Mr. Hartke. Discussion. Seeing none, all in favor? All opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move adoption of resolution number 10050, authorizing purchases not following the purchasing policy.
Second by Mr. Hartke again. Discussion. Seeing none, all in favor? All opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move adoption of the Finance Committee moves adoption of resolution number 10051, establishing salaries of the county clerk, sheriff, and treasurer.
Second by Ms. Petrie. Discussion. Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. All opposed? No. Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Finance Committee moves adoption of resolution number 10052, establishing the salary of the county executive. And if this receives a second, I would ask to be recognized to speak to it.
Second by Mr. Hartke. Mr. Alex, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman and County Board colleagues, there's an old anecdote which has been misattributed to any number of famous people, the punchline of which is, we've already established that, now we're just dickering over the price. Before we commence to dickering about the price of the salary of the county executive, I think that there's something that we need to establish one way or the other, and that is we need to specify the future of the county administrator position. And I came tonight prepared to offer an amendment to this resolution affirming the need for the county administrator position, even in the county executive form of government, so that we could have a discussion about that. But as a result of the Open Meetings Act, the way in which the agenda item was worded is going to preclude discussion of that amendment. So I would like to move to defer this item to the September Finance Committee so that we can address this defect, and I would like to speak to that if it receives a second.
Second by Mr. Hartke. Mr. Alex, you have the floor again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's no secret that I'm not a supporter of the county executive position, but there's nothing I could do about that at this point. And I'm not a supporter of paying that position $117,000 a year, but I only have one vote. So what I do hope that this board will consider doing is considering two reasons why I believe that a resolution that sets the salary of the county executive also needs to address the future of the county administrator position. First, I believe that anyone who's thinking about running for county executive is entitled to know whether this is a position for a citizen legislator who builds relationships, makes appointments, and crafts policy, while the highly technical day-to-day business of running the county is handled by a professional administrator, or whether this is a position for a unicorn, someone who's not only willing to dive into the swamp of partisan politics, but who also happens to possess all the education, qualifications, and experience of a professional municipal administrator, with a working knowledge of municipal finance, bonds, tax levies, labor law, human resources, benefits, budgeting, IT, planning and zoning, economic development, code enforcement, law enforcement, the justice system, facilities management, highways and transportation, liability insurance, workers' compensation insurance, FOIA and OMA and PTEL and so forth. You get the idea.
If it's the first, I think that we can find that type of a person to run for this office every 4 years. If it's the second, not so much. Most importantly, I think the candidates for this position, those who are announced and those who have yet to announce, deserve to know not only what the job pays, but what the job is. Second, when the Chamber of Commerce and the Farm Bureau sold this plan to the voters, it was done with the assurance that it wouldn't cost anything. Of course, even assuming that the executive would replace the administrator, this still wouldn't be entirely true. The law does require the board to hire an attorney and a chief of staff if the executive wants them. Several potential candidates for this office have said to me that they see the executive as a public-facing and policy-making role, and that they would still want a professional administrator beside them keeping the county running. I've also heard it suggested that expecting one administrator to do what Ms. Busey did and what Mr. Snyder is doing isn't sustainable anyway, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's a likely bet that regardless of who runs and who wins and what they get paid, they and this board are going to decide either up front or they're going to find out the hard way that an elected official trying to single-hand a $125 million operation without the services of a professional administrator is not going to work. And if taxpayers are likely to end up paying for both a county executive and a county administrator anyway, they deserve to know now rather than being set up for another bait and switch. So I encourage the county board to support this motion to defer so that the final resolution can, one way or the other, address the county administrator position. Regardless of what happens on the political and policy side, we can assure the voters that the day-to-day business of the county will still be taken care of by a qualified, professional, and accountable county administrator, or we can let the voters and the taxpayers and potential candidates know what to expect from this position. So I would respectfully ask my county board colleagues to consider deferring this to the September Finance Committee meeting.
Mr. McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a few issues with this. One, I guess the voters decided that this is what they wanted based on the law, and it defines pretty broad description of what this could do, and it could do either. The next board, and the county exec that is elected can decide how they want to set up the way the county board will be run, whether it has an administrator or doesn't have an administrator. They could save money on the budget in a lot of different ways, whether it includes the administrator or doesn't. So I don't think there's a restriction. I don't think there's we're trying to decide for the voters after they've voted and determined that they want the exact how the government is going to be set up and what rules they decide to vote for. I don't think we should determine for them how they voted or what they wanted. I think we should follow through with what they asked for, which was a county exec to move this county forward, which is something I think is important. We don't know. I think it's going to be an improvement. We're going to save money either way. The second part of this is you want to move it to the next full board meeting. Petitions start circulating September 5th, as I understand it. We are setting up a situation where the voters then also will be limited in their choices for the election, because then the person who likely might want to run may have to wait a month before they start circulating petitions, and we're hampering their ability to run and be on the ballot and limiting the choices for the voters. I think that's an issue. I still don't understand why there's still a question on the setting the salary for the elected official. If a neighborhood services director in the city of Champaign can be paid $117,000, obviously the person leading the county in the future with a $36 million budget and the number of employees that we have at the county, we do this quite a bit with this county, not pay properly. And I've been in a lot of negotiations and heard everybody discuss what people are worth and not worth. And this is always an issue, whether it's management or labor. And I don't see an issue with this. And I think we should just move the motion tonight and finish this so the voters, we follow through with what the voters have asked for, get the person moving on his opportunity or hers. I think we actually have a couple of good, at least so far, a couple of good candidates. Thank you.
Mr. Hartke.
I don't think there's any debate as to whether we're going to create a county executive, and I don't think anybody's disagreeing with the voters that they voted to have a county executive. Whether they voted to have a six-figure county executive is a different matter. I don't think this was really well explained to folks as to how important it is to have a county administrator. When you look at the effectiveness of Champaign city government with a city manager, you look at the effectiveness that we have had as a county board, and I think it has been effective to have a nonpartisan, informational professional such as Deb Busey and Rick Snyder to help lead our direction has been important. I think you look at the city of Urbana, which just had a mayoral election, which one of the main issues was the new mayor wanted to hire a professional administrator to help run the city. I think it's highly irresponsible for us to not have a trained professional to manage these issues. And then it just becomes a simple conflict as to whether we're going to keep the promises to the community that they said we would keep and keep this a budget neutral situation. I also want to point out that some of the salaries this is being compared to are not elected officials. They are professionals that are in competition nationwide for positions. That's not going to be the case here. And I think we really need to be careful about this. And quite frankly, I'm not too worried about an extra week or two for folks to not be collecting their petitions. They're going to have plenty of time. They have through the end of November. I know one person has already declared and planning on collecting petitions no matter what the salary is. Other folks have said that that's what they intend to do. I think this would be proof in the pudding if they start collecting signatures before the salary is set, that they really want to do this job, not just get a raise or go for a six-figure salary. So there have been a lot of discussions about this. I think there's some people who are still a little confused about what this position will really do, and I think putting this off till September gives us all a chance to think about this. I mean, we really are in a financially tight situation, and quite frankly, I'm not going to go back to my community and say, you know, we're going to cut our reentry program, or we're going to reduce staffing in the clerk's office for elections, or we're going to take road deputies off because we can't afford it because we've hired a new county executive that is really a glorified county board member with some veto power. Currently, we operate under a situation where our county board chair makes not quite $30,000 a year and has a paid administrator that works for them that makes $100 grand more than that, basically. That's a system that can work. It's a system that has worked, and we may have some disagreements on that. But I don't think anyone can disagree that the advice that Deb Busey gave this board when she was in her role was at all partisan or mistaken or unfactual. And I think with Rick's performance so far, I think we've seen pretty much the exact same thing from him. And we want to be able to encourage that as a board. And I just can't believe we're in this kind of situation where we're talking about how tight things are and even considering layoffs, and we're going to create a $117,000 position for this. Of course we're going to create a county executive. We are required by law to do so, but we have the discretion as a county board to set that salary, and I think we need to take a serious look at it.
Further discussion. I just want to point out that the next county board meeting is on the 16th of September, so it's about, the 21st will be 16 days after the 5th of September. Mr. Marsh.
I think it's disturbing to me when we say we're going to do this to cut this position and say, gee, maybe we're going to cut this, and we're selling fear instead of really talking about the position. I mean, we're in a financial situation we're in because for 15 years we haven't correctly ran a nursing home, and we have that to contend with. Really, we should have a financially sound county if we would take care of that big issue. But to throw others out and say, if we're going to have this six-figure salary, we're going to have to maybe go back to our constituencies and saying we're cutting a reentry program, that is comments that don't help us make a good decision, because that's really not on the table. Those are fear tactics. The same thing, we know we can set this position in place and control whether there's an attorney hired or not, because we control the funding. So we control the funding, what happens, and I'm assured in my own mind that we can do this and save money. Overall, we talked about Pius's position and what that would move to on a lower rate. We talked about the county administrator, and so we can do this and save money and have more money to spend. So I'm very confident of that. And I think that's the level we need to talk on.
Mr. Anderson.
Thank you, Mr.
Remember, we're talking on a motion to defer, just to clarify.
Correct. I'm not in support of the motion to defer. The voters said what they wanted this past spring. Waiting another month, creating an issue with the gathering of signatures. In my own mind, we discussed this at the COW. Everybody had an opportunity to speak, opinions were voiced, and at the end of the day, a vote was taken in favor. And I would rather move forward with that than continue delays and create problems with that.
Mr. Esri.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I too am not in favor of deferring. I would agree that we probably should have had the conversation before about maybe how this is going to wind up, what the actual position and how it's going to be configured and everything like that, but we haven't done it. Well, crunch time is here, folks. The petitions come out. Yeah, you can start circulating them September 5th. One more month, for this board to hash out in 1 month, what I'm kind of hearing, the idea that we're going to hash out how it's going to be configured and then set the pay, I don't see that happening, personally. So the voters have spoken. With the way I understand it, the powers that can be given to this new county executive in kind of running the day-to-day activities of the county, I think the resolution at $117,000 is a good position to start. Thank you.
Mr. Patterson.
I know a lot of you guys have made reference to the voters speaking, and to be clear, Gordon can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the resolution read, shall Champaign County adopt the executive form of government and not become home rule? It's one sentence. We're talking about a very complicated position, and the referendum was one sentence. We just had a property tax increase referendum that was 4 paragraphs. Even that year, the countywide elected chair position that Patsy put forward was multiple paragraphs. So to sit here and assume the will of the voters and a mandate of the voters, I don't think that's rational or fair. I don't think that's being honest. And I think that, we're not asking to set the salary or anything. I don't think Mr. Alex is proposing that. I think he's proposing that we sit back and we think about getting rid of our professional staff. You'd be hard pressed to find a form of government where somebody is serving in an executive type capacity and does not have professional administrative staff. We have a county auditor whose role is to be the county's accountant, and not to pick on JJ, but he's not professionally an accountant. I'm not saying he can't do his job, but he's not an accountant. He has an accountant hired. And in fact, his top accountant makes more than he does. We just, as we said, we just saw the city of Urbana, they had an experiment in getting rid of an administrator, and the people rejected that. So, we sit here and we think about how many hours somebody like Rick puts in, and we think about the expertise, all the things that Mr. Alex listed off. Relying on that somebody is going to run for this and be absolutely qualified and absolutely capable of doing all that, that's just naive, and I don't think it's being honest. And I think that even if we do move forward with setting this at 117 with the plan of not having an administrator, we're going to have an administrator. The only other example we have in the state of Illinois is Will County, and they have a six-figure administrator along with their six-figure executive, along with an attorney, which we are mandated by law to hire. So we're just asking to have a conversation. I agree with Mr. Esri that we should have handled this earlier. And I'm had that conversation with a lot of you guys privately, that I wish we would have gotten moving on this sooner, but the reality is we've had a lot of stuff to deal with. How many 3-hour-plus meetings have we had this year? And we neglected having this discussion. It's not too late. 16 days into filing is our next county board meeting. If you're considering running for a countywide office and you don't have an operation in place so where you can't lose 16 days out of a 2-month petition period, it's probably not somebody who's going to win to begin with. So I just ask you to consider just having a conversation.
Mr. Summers?
I'm going to be supporting Mr. Alex's motion to defer. I've heard from a number of constituents with regard to the salary level, and I too don't think that waiting a few days to have some continued discussion and some clarification would be irreparable for people that are wanting to run for this office. I do have to add, though, that I've heard a lot of folks talking about how the voters have said what they wanted. Well, if the referendum question had said a county executive at $117,000 a year, let's see how many votes that would garner.
Ms. Furtado?
I just want to say, I know I'm new, and so sometimes I'm hesitant to speak, but I actually really find it disturbing that this isn't more well-defined before we're taking this vote. I mean, we got to go back and look at 6 figures is a lot of money, and I don't get why having one more conversation about it is so controversial. Like Kyle said, if you can't circulate, the threshold to get on a ballot is low. If you can't circulate your petitions by missing 16 days, you aren't going to win. You're not even going to have a chance. So that's just straw man, frankly. But just the idea that we can't even take the time as a board to have a more substantive conversation about how we think this is going to work. If everybody on the board is in agreement, like, oh, we're not going to have a county administrator, the person should know. If there's some people that think, oh, no, we need to have one, the person should know. They're going to have to work with us. And, if we have expectations, I think it's completely appropriate to let the person running know. And the fact that we haven't had that full conversation and then are just going to go ahead and vote for 6 figures, and that's okay? I mean, I'm new, but that's just not okay. And the idea that we don't have time to have one more conversation, we have to rush into this, I don't get it. It's a lot of money. And I actually think that this body needs to deliberate more about things. And I'm new, but that's my opinion. This idea that we have to hurry up and vote, I actually really find it disturbing.
Further discussion. Ms. Petrie?
I have an information question before I make any comments to Mr. Snyder. Do you have a level of expectation of how long each of those budget meetings will last on this coming Monday and Tuesday?
Well, we're going into a new format this year. As you know, we consolidated down from 3 evenings to 2. I think Monday evening will probably be the longer evening. I think probably about 4 hours, possibly. I'm hoping that the Tuesday evening will be a little bit shorter, maybe about 3 hours.
Okay. Well, I'm listening to the comments here and trying to balance some of it and trying to see if we can't reach a modicum of coalescing, and that is if Mr. Alex would accept a friendly amendment that it be deferred until the 27th of August for a special county board meeting.
I would decline to accept that amendment. I think it's something that's more appropriately addressed at a committee meeting.
Well, that drags things out such a long time. I do agree, and I have said this publicly, and I said it at last Tuesday's meeting, that past history of the county board is, in doing decision-making, slams things against a brick wall without really providing sufficient time for conversation, and this is a prime example of it. This should have been on the agenda at a minimum in June and July for conversation, because all we're doing is focusing on personalities and the money. And we're not focusing one iota on the best interests of the county and what these roles will be. And I think we can define to some extent the roles of the elected county executive, and I'm totally in agreement that there needs to be a county administrator. And we still haven't even discussed, we're giving $12,000 to the county board chair, and we haven't even discussed what that role will be among these three individuals. It is so typical of us doing things in this manner without considering what is the best interest of the county. We have an opportunity to really become a model and instituting what the voters gave to us to work with. As I said before, I'm sure there will be efforts to rescind it, but that won't happen for 2020 or 2022, and in between those years, the county has a whole lot of work to do, very pivotal work, and it's very important. And for those reasons, I'm not willing right now to defer it unless we can figure out an earlier date than putting it at the September committee, the Finance Committee meeting, which is Committee of the Whole, because that just drags things along, and I don't think there will be any advancement for that long period of time in the quality of discussion. If we were going to do it next week, I think the quality of discussion, because we've just had it, has a chance of being robust. That's not going to be the case if we as we drag it out, and I'm just extremely frustrated that we're in this situation and this wasn't done in June.
Let's go with Mr. McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand and I appreciate Mr. Alex's point here in trying to define things better. But I also agree with Patsy that we're talking about something that happens in 2018 and later. And now we're trying to decide within a few weeks what those responsibilities are going to be while we determine the budget and our general normal work as a county board, which do we want an administrator? Do we, what other structure do we need for the county, for the county board in 2018? And there will be a lot of things that happen over the next 18 months that board will be deciding and have to make decisions about, that we're going to try to decide in the next couple weeks, in 2 weeks. And then that's just not enough time to make those decisions or try to make those decisions in a short period of time. I just don't feel confident in that. I can understand why you'd like to, but I don't think we do ourselves any good, and I don't think we do that future board any good. Thank you.
Mr. Alex first, and you, Mr. Ennis. Go ahead, Mr. Alex.
I think Mr. Anderson was first. You want to go?
Well, we're in the second round, so why don't you go first? Both of you in the second round.
I just wanted to reiterate the basis for my motion, and that's not to say what I think the salary should be or whether we should have a county administrator, although I feel strongly that we should. My point is essentially that anyone who is running for this position, if we're arguing that they won't be able to decide whether to run or not until the salary is set, I'm not proposing that we completely define every aspect of this position. I'm simply saying that I think the county board providing guidance as to whether or not this county board intends to support the continuation of a county administrator position substantially changes what that county executive role will consist of, what the qualifications are, who would be eligible to run for that position, and what they would do once they took office. So I don't want this to sound like I'm proposing, months of discussion here on every last point of these offices. But I do believe that the issue of whether or not this person will be working beside or instead of a county executive, or a county administrator, is a fundamental change in this office. So I would hope that we are able to come to that conclusion. If this motion to defer fails, I'll certainly ask that we bring a resolution in September to attempt to clarify that, because I do think that people who are running for this office basically deserve to know what resources this county board is willing to commit to them. And it will be this board. I mean, there's not a county board election between now and the time that the county executive will take office. So it will be this board that's making the decision as to whether or not to continue to include the county administrator in the schedule of authorized positions, and if so, what salary that office would carry. Thank you.
Mr. Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I listen to the discussions, I'll focus on one item, and that is whether or not we'll have a county administrator under the county executive form of government. That truly, as I understand it, is up to the county executive. It's to this board to decide what to fund the administrative side of the county executive so that they'll have staff sufficient to perform their duties as are required under statute or somewhat defined under statute. So for this board to be engaging in whether or not we'll have an administrator, it is up to the executive, as I understand it, to decide whether they'll have an attorney, whether or not they'll have some chief of staff, and ultimately, I guess, a administrator. And that may all depend upon the bona fides of that administrator or executive. Maybe they won't feel the need because they'll have the expertise. Or maybe they'll only draw upon, they'll come up with some other way to manage it. They're elected to that office. They'll have to decide how they want to operate it. So for us to be talking about, should we be talking about whether or not they'll have an administrator? I don't believe that's our decision. I believe that ultimately comes to the executive unless someone tells me otherwise. Thank you.
Mr. Anderson, just want to put a point of clarification. You're right about the county executive can decide if they want to administer it or not. However, and the state statute says that the county executive can have their own legal counsel. It doesn't say anything about any other staff, but the budget would be the way that it would be. Obviously, the county executive has to have a budget to afford to hire that person, so that's where the county board.
That's how I see it, and I could see that.
So it's a budgetary decision.
True,
Obviously.
and I could see that person petitioning this board at some point for adjustments to that very budget, but that's in the future.
Yeah. Further discussion. Mr. Patterson, go ahead.
Mr. Anderson's absolutely right. I agree with him. When it comes to the idea of a chief of staff or administrator, that is the decision of the executive. They're autonomous. But when the people who put this proposal forward, the Chamber of Commerce and the Farm Bureau last week, the representatives came in here and said that we would keep this budget neutral by eliminating the administrator's position, and then their proposal was adopted, then that is the board creating the assumption that the executive won't have a choice of whether or not to have an administrator, because we're saying that we're not going to provide the funds for it, because we're going to keep it budget neutral, and we're establishing a salary at $117,000 to keep it budget neutral. So on one end, I understand your argument that we can't sit here and decide whether or not they're going to have that, but at the same time, we can't sit here and decide they're not. And to me, the arguments I've been hearing, if I've not been hearing them right, I appreciate if you clarify, but I've been hearing that we're going to keep it budget neutral by eliminating the salary of the administrator and setting this at 6 figures. So if you could clarify that for me, that would be great.
Mr. Anderson,
just briefly, ultimately, it would be up to the executive to decide their own staffing and their own budget to operate within that budget once we vote on their budget. So if they want to realign the resources and talents, employees within their administrative division, they can, and it can end up budget neutral. For us to assume it won't be, that's just a discussion you can have for a while. But ultimately, they'll be given a budget. They'll have to live within it.
Further discussion. Ms. Petrie.
Just a reminder that it's this board that will be setting that budget for 2019, and that will be the budget whoever is elected will be working with.
Mr. Hartke.
So therefore, if we do set this budget ahead of time, and within that budget is a $117,000 salary for this executive, and then $12,000 for whoever serves as the effective board chair, that will then leave what, about $25,000 to $30,000? If this is taking the administrator's salary out and the board chair's salary out, that adds up to about $160,000. So we subtract the 117, and then we subtract the 12. That's going to leave about $40,000 to hire a professional administrator. I don't see how we hire anybody with any major qualifications for $40,000 and still keep this budget neutral. And that's the point here, guys, is that we're trying to figure out how to keep this budget neutral because that's how it was sold to the public. And I, for one, am not going to have the Farm Bureau say, oh, it's on the county board to make this budget neutral, then not vote to make it budget neutral and have them attack us for it because they put this on us. So I don't see what kind of administrator you're going to hire for $40,000 a year and still keep this budget neutral.
Mr. Goss.
Yeah, I think the part of it that needs to be understood is budget neutral means the administrative division. So I don't know what that budget number is, but I assure you it's more than the salary of an administrator and a county board chair.
Mr. Hartke.
And then who else are we going to lay off? The director of finance, the director of facilities? I mean,
we're wandering off from.
Very good.
Thing. Further discussion on the motion to defer. See none? Okay, we'll have a roll call vote, please.
Patterson,
Yes.
Petrie,
No.
Rector, no. Rosales,
Yes.
Summers, Tinsley,
Yes.
Alex, Anderson, Clemens,
No.
Cowart, Cruz, Esri,
No.
Furtado,
Yes.
Goss,
No.
Harper, Hartke,
yes.
King, Marsh,
No.
McGuire, Mitchell, Weibel,
Yes. Motion carries. Defer till Cal meeting in September.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move adoption of resolution number 10097, approval of short-term loan from the general fund of the Champaign County Nursing Home Enterprise Fund, which is the most recent copy, which is here. I would also note that this requires a roll call and 15 votes for passage. Is that correct, Mr. Chair?
Correct.
Thank you.
Is there a second? Second by Ms. Petrie. Would you like to talk about this? Mr. Snyder.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I've provided for you in your packet, you should have the status update. Now I'm going to give you an update to the update. We originally stated that we anticipated, we had about $71,000 in the cash balance after satisfying AP and payroll last Thursday. We also received, as of today, an additional Medicaid payment of $187,449. So that brings our current cash balance to about $360,000. So I anticipate that the second payroll in September is the one where we're going to hit a crunch. We should be able to actually make it through September 1st with our existing resources. Again, that there's a caveat on that, of course, and that is we can't always predict what demands may be made by vendors from now on going forward. We have had some very constructive discussions with two of the major vendors in the last 2 weeks, the therapy vendor and our pharmaceutical vendor. And so I feel that we have a way to move forward with them. We still have an outstanding issue with our previous dietary vendor that will need to be resolved. And we are continuing on our medical supplies vendor on a payment plan that we've established through the State Attorney's Office. I just want to point out, too, in terms of this request for $250,000, we still have the $15,000 remaining on the first loan, first credit line, I guess I would say. So we haven't exhausted that entirely. Looking at the treasurer's cash flow projection that he provided at the Committee of the Whole meeting, it showed enterprise fund balance of negative $289 by the end of the year for the nursing home. That did not take into account this additional loan. So based on some of the savings that we've been seeing through our new management company, I'm feeling more comfortable now that this may be the final request that we'll have for the remainder of this year. We are looking at a budget. We just received a proposed budget from SAK for fiscal year 18. We just got it, so I have not had a chance to vet it, but we are going to be reviewing that tomorrow with SAK, and then we'll provide something to be presented next week during the legislative budget hearing. So we'll be able to give you a little bit better idea where the budget stands for next year. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions about the resolution or the current status on the nursing home.
Ms. Petrie.
I have several questions. It is my understanding that you are working in bringing to the board a budget for 6 months that will take us to June of 2018. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Okay. And then within that, based on some figures that I have heard, and they may have changed, that projected the amount of money that the county may be in a need to loan to the nursing home by that time could be close to $1 million. Is that still accurate?
The original discussion, I think, was about $1.5 million for the full year of 2018. So a 6-month budget, if you want to extrapolate, that would mean about $750,000. So based on the savings, and I've run through this in the status update here,
okay.
My estimates were that SAK has been able to save approximately $60,000 a month in expenses. About $15,000 a month on the changes to the dietary contract, allowing for the new food vendor and also the cost of the salary for a certified dietary manager in the home. We also are saving about $35,000 a month through the cancellation of all of the contract support help. That includes the accounting firm that had been working on the billing and other related issues, the MDS coordinator, which is a very expensive contract, and one administrator. We've also notified 4 employees that their positions are being eliminated, and we're going to be eliminating several more in the next month or so. So those savings I estimated about $10,000. So that adds up to about $60,000, but if you subtract the difference between the old management contract and the current management contract, that leaves a savings of about $35,000 a month. So for the 6 months, that adds up to about $210,000 in savings. We have made an allocation in the proposed budget to cover either the debt service or perhaps a loan that might be needed. We have 1 3-payroll month in March again, so we expect that there may be a crunch there. But I believe that looking at what the proposal is that the bleeding will be substantially. I'm not saying that the home is sustainable or anything else. I don't want that to be misquoted, so I want to make that clear. But what we'll do, I think, is reduce the amount of the loss substantially. So that's where I see us moving forward on that.
May I follow up? Thank you. So the net saving of roughly $35,000, do you see that as a constant for the upcoming months, or do you see it decreasing as maybe there's a need to increase staffing as more residents come to the home?
Of course, the census level determines many of these expenses. Dietary particularly is a variable expense. Although I think our savings actually increase somewhat. If we had more, we'd be able to spread out some of the fixed costs over more persons in the home.
Yes, okay.
So.
All right, and then I'd like to reflect on the last paragraph in the resolution, because one of my great concerns is that whichever path the board goes down in relationship to the nursing home, that the county is protected. And I'm assuming that the SA office has reviewed this resolution, and is the last paragraph sufficient wording to protect the county so that the county is first in line in any repayments should there be an abundance of money that comes to the nursing home and/or the nursing home is sold?
We're in uncharted waters in this area, frankly. There is no provision for loans or forgiveness of loans within the county's code in Illinois. And as you know, we're not a home rule entity, so we must live and die by the code. Talking with the state's attorney's office, one of the things and one of the reasons why this was amended very recently this week is that the county does not have the legal authority to insert itself ahead of other creditors in terms of payment of bills. So the bills that must be paid either under the law or through a contract arrangement that we have with the vendor must be honored. If we were to sell the home, we would be paying those along with the county debts. I think the intent of this, though, was to express that the intention for the county to make sure that we make the general fund whole if a sale is transacted. We know that we are in a difficult financial situation, and that any proceeds that would come out of this would not be put towards other projects, maybe other facilities issues or other things, but make sure that we do take care of the county's financial situation first before anything else were done. But that we do want to make sure that, and we assure our vendors and others that they are going to have their debts paid in full.
So the bottom line interpretation on my part is that, in essence, the county is the last person in the line for repayment. Is that accurate?
It's not that they're last in line, but they cannot be prioritized above anyone else.
Okay, thanks for the clarity.
Further discussion? Mr. Alex.
You'll hear me say this at the budget hearings as well, but in case we want to get it out here as well, I'm extremely pleased to see the progress that SAK is making in terms of getting expenses under control at the nursing home. But I would sort of reiterate what Mr. Snyder said, which is there are really sort of three components to sustainability. You know, the simplest is the nursing home being able to generate revenues that exceed its expenses. However, the other two components are, one, it needs a way to pay off its accumulated vendor debt, and it needs a way to build enough of a cash balance to provide for capital asset replacement and to protect against short-term cash flow issues. So looking a little bit down the road, I would argue that that sustainability essentially requires all three of those components. So, thank you.
Further discussion? Mr. Schneider, you want to say something?
Just a quick comment also. Looking at the previous scenarios when we had evaluated options for moving forward with the nursing home, one of the options, of course, was the idea that we'd seek additional levy authority for supporting the operations at the home. That levy was anticipated to generate about $2.5 million a year approximately, or if you want to look at in other terms, about $200,000 a month. So when we're talking about $35,000 a month in savings, it's a long way from the $200,000 that would have gone towards repayment of the debt, repaying the county for all of the loans and other monies that have been given to the home, and also to establish a fund balance and to also provide for the depreciation that hasn't been accounted for since 2005. So all those things are folded into that. So I just want to make sure that people understand that while we're glad that we do have the progress on the expenditures, there's a long road to hoe before we consider something to be sustainable in terms of the nursing home.
Further discussion. Ms. Petrie.
I'd just like to add one more thing. When Mr. Alex talks about this at budget time, the nursing home needs to also rebuild a major maintenance fund.
All right, let's go back to the vote on the loan. Any further discussion? We have to automatic roll call. It has to be roll call. Roll call, please.
Patterson? Yes. Petrie?
Yes.
Rector? Yes. Rosales?
Yes.
Summers? Yes. Tinsley?
Yes.
Alex? Anderson? Yes. Clemens? Yes. Coert? Yes. Cruz? Yes. Esri?
Yes.
Furtado?
No.
Goss?
Yes.
Harper? Hartke?
Yes.
King?
There's Mr. Harper.
Oh.
What's that? Oh. No on me.
King? Marsh?
No.
McGuire?
Yes.
Mitchell?
Yes.
Weibel?
Yes, motion carries. Finance, Mr. Alex. Thank you. Okay, is there any other business? Mr. Mitchell.
I just wanted to announce that I'm not, I've chosen not to run for reelection this election cycle.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Mitchell, we'll miss you. But you're still around to the end, you can't leave now.
Yeah, you know, you can give me a good going away present, thanks.
All right, I see there's no other business, we're adjourned.